I'm Angelica Miskanin. I'm an art therapist here at JFCS, and I specialize in trauma.
I'm Kelly Moore. I also am an art therapist here at JFCS, and I also specialize in trauma. So today we're going to talk about what it's like approaching the date of 10/27 and how we think people can be supportive and what they can be aware of as they approach the date of 10/27.
Well, when we think about approaching any anniversary date where we've experienced grief or loss the way that we have with 10/27, it's important to remember that the body really holds that memory. So even if it doesn't feel like it's at the forefront of your mind or your thinking brain, as we call it, that your body tends to remember before the thinking brain does, right? Yeah. So as we're well into October now, the season has really started to come upon us, the change in temperature. Yeah. So the things that we smell, the things that we're used to eating perhaps, there's more of a dampness in the air as the rain kind of comes, a little bit more often. So any of the things that really affect our five senses are things that we often will remember before our actual thinking brain starts to remember for us, that, this date is approaching. And while we might be cognizant of it, we also might not understand why we might be experiencing more irritability or aggravation. Maybe some of us have a little bit of a shorter temper, and we're not sure why we're on edge. And that's just one example. There are a lot of different emotions that people can experience right now.
There might be a day where you're just feeling totally off, and there are symptoms in which you're having with that irritability or sadness, and you don't recognize it until later in the day, and you're like, oh, my body was just sensing that before my brain caught up to that.
Yeah, I know, and working with folks around the traumatic impact of 10/27 now 2 years later, that a lot of those symptoms are emerging for folks, and even when we go back and even maybe process other losses that a person might experience, sometimes people are able to make those connections, that they can start to recall that they had similar kinds of experiences then that may be occurring for some people now.
Yeah, I think even speaking to the fact of losses right now, like being in a pandemic, there are so many losses too. So that's also compounding what's happening in the now.
I love that you said that, and how important that is to think about what adds to the complexity of the situation today for some people.
So I want to ask the question of moving into the idea of coping in this situation and how to care for ourselves, because it's a really difficult time. Yeah. So what are our ideas for how to suggest that for people?
So I think it's important, I stress this all the time, as I imagine that you do, the importance of taking care of yourself. We talk a lot about self-care. And what does it really mean? I think when we talk about that with our clients, or with anyone in the community, we're really trying to emphasize ways of helping to regulate the nervous system and manage our stress responses. Yeah. The reason that I think that's important to note is because of the basic understanding that we have, at least, about what happens to the brain under both in terms of traumatic response, but also a very, very similar kind of process happens for those who are feeling heightened in stress levels, right? So we'll often talk about the way that the brain works, and I do my little hand model, and I'm taking this from another therapist who has this really wonderful video where she explains the brain to teens and to children in this very simplistic way. But I also find that it helps people in general, no matter what age you are. And she talks about these different parts of the brain we refer to. We'll say this part of the brain is the limbic system, right? So this is what we can simply call the emotional brain. But she calls this part of the brain the barking dog. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Then the the other part of the brain that sits kind of as a cap over top of that is what we sometimes refer to simply as the thinking brain. And they work in conjunction with each other pretty well, usually when we're in a pretty nice, calm space. The therapist that I was referring to a minute ago calls the thinking brain the wise owl. But when we have a fear response of any kind, a stress response, a response to traumatic impact, what happens is that the thinking brain essentially kind of goes offline, or is compromised. Sometimes I'll just refer to it as being compromised, and that's an important thing to realize. So the owl flies away as the dog starts to bark, right? So, and I tuck my thumb in to indicate that's where the amygdala is. That's the fear center of the brain. So it sends off a signal to the body, and it goes off like an alarm, and it tells the body to do something. In the most extreme moments, that really does tend to be that survival mode, fight, flight, and freeze. And so while the dog is barking, the owl flies away and they're not able to communicate. So when we talk about regulating our nervous system, when we talk about managing those emotions, right, we're talking about finding ways to calm the barking dog and bring the wise owl back into play so that we can think more clearly, we can make better decisions for ourselves, we can ultimately manage our emotions and stress responses in a more responsible way. When we think about ways to soothe the barking dog, if you will, to sort of calm down the fear response in the brain, what are some things that you think of or that you share with your clients about how to do that?
Yeah, so, going for walks and like being in nature, and if painting or doing art works for you, journaling, exercise is always a good idea. The things that bring you comfort, I always emphasize. So if it brings you joy, then do those things. So if that, and always a mix up too, like I wouldn't always just like do that thing over and over, because you're going to get sick of that eventually. But
or you may not have access to it in one moment. So it's really good to have a packed toolbox of things that you can access. And one of the things I know you and I talk about a lot is when you have no other tools at your disposal, you always have your breath with you. I want to be respectful of what works for people, but even just bringing attention back to the breath, not having to change it in any way. We do promote diaphragmatic breathing in our work. We do understand that there's a lot of benefit to it. But for those who feel like, I've had a really bad experience with it, then, bringing the attention, just saying to yourself, perhaps, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. That in itself helps to bring the focus to the present moment.
Yeah, we've also talked a lot about being aware of those five senses in general. So like if you are somewhere and you're being ruminative upon thoughts or getting really anxious, like just bringing your thoughts back to like, okay, what do I smell right now? Or what am I seeing around the room?
Exactly.
Those can also be quite calming. So
yeah, those are what we refer to as the grounding techniques, or ways to anchor yourself in the present. So mindfulness techniques, essentially. And, even as Kelly and I were in a room full of lots of little objects and different colors, and light is, coming from different places. So, if I were having an anxiety response right now, I could focus on, I see, something over there in the window, and I could really just kind of like notice the colors, really, just maybe create a narrative in my mind about, what it is that I'm noticing. And that, again, pulls the attention straight into this moment as opposed to forward or backward.
Yeah.
Lots of things that people can do, searching for joy, but also, giving yourself the space to actually mourn and grieve, I think is also really important. I think a lot of times, there may be an interpretation that taking care of yourself doesn't involve feeling your feelings of sadness, feeling the feelings of anger, or whatever it may be. Those feelings are really uncomfortable and unpleasant for a lot of people. But if you're able to kind of sit with those feelings, letting yourself cry if you need to, that is a way of releasing.
Yeah.
And so finding healthier ways, or I use the word responsible ways, to just refer to, the process of expressing, without harming yourself, without harming someone else. And of course, Kelly and I, as art therapists, I love that she also brought up art making as one way to, to practice mindfulness and to also release in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes up sometimes with some of our clients, I think, is, while taking care of yourself is a form of taking action, a lot of times, especially as 1027 approaches, there's a feeling that seems to be re-emerging if it hasn't been there kind of the whole time, but it tends to re-emerge. It's this feeling of like, what can I do?
Yeah.
What can I do to take action? A lot of people feel that need to do something, to whether that's being a part of some kind of social action or advocacy, committee, or taking part in something like that. At the time that the shooting happened, a lot of people brought flowers to the site, to the synagogue. And I do think that oftentimes people feel a sense of powerlessness or helplessness in the situation. And so even the act of bringing flowers somewhere is an act of service, even though it may seem small. But there are a lot of ways that people in our community can be supportive of each other and of social action in general.
Taking care of yourself is a way of being a part of the community, and then furthermore is looking out for those in which you care for. So really getting involved with those that are close to you, like as we are right now in a pandemic and then close to 1027, it's really hard. So connecting with those that you really care about, I think that is taking action. So whether that's, baking things for them and delivering them, or just, sending a cute note to them and mailing it.
Yeah, helping those who may have a need, performing mitzvahs in whatever capacity you feel like you're capable of, even attending Torah study or sitting in prayer are ways for some people to feel like they are providing a service or taking action themselves in some way. So there are a lot of different ways to do that, but we do appreciate the importance of being able to do that. At this time, we do recognize that things are really difficult for folks in the community. We recognize, that things are hard for each of us, as staff here, but please know that there is support available if you feel like there is the need for that. You're welcome to contact JFCS if that need arises, and we're here to try to help provide resources as best we can to help with whatever difficulties or struggles people are facing, whether it's to do with 1027 or other things that compound that for folks. We do send light and gratitude to each and every one of you as we move through this difficult time together.